When I look back at the turning point in my journey, it all began with one simple but very hard realization. I had to face the truth and take full responsibility for my life. For a long time, I lived in a cycle of excuses, blaming my circumstances, other people, or even fate for why I wasn't where I wanted to be. It was easier to point outward than inward, but deep down, I knew that until I owned my story, both the successes and the failures, I would never move forward. Accepting responsibility was not just about saying, "Yes, this is my life." It was about acknowledging that the condition of my life was the result of my choices, my habits, and my mindset. That was a hard pill to swallow, because it meant I couldn't keep hiding behind excuses anymore. I remember days when I would say to myself, if only I had better opportunities, if only I had more support, if only life wasn't so unfair. Those words became chains that kept me stuck. The truth was, life wasn't going to suddenly become easier just because I wished it would. Waiting for external change meant I would be waiting forever. The real change had to begin within me. Facing that truth was uncomfortable because it stripped me of my safety net. It forced me to admit that if I was unhappy with where I was also the only one who could do something about it. That's when I began to see responsibility not as a burden but as a gift. Responsibility gave me power. It showed me that if my choices had created a life I didn't want, then new choices could create the life I did want. This mindset shift didn't happen overnight. At first, it felt like I was wrestling with myself. Old habits of blame kept creeping in, but every time I caught myself saying, "This isn't my fault," I reminded myself that while I couldn't control everything, I could control my response. That became my anchor. I realized that responsibility didn't mean I was to blame for everything that happened to me, but it did mean I was accountable for how I responded, what I learned, and how I moved forward. That difference changed everything. It gave me the courage to stop seeing myself as a victim of life and instead as a creator of my future. Once I embraced this mindset, I started to notice a new level of clarity. Instead of asking, "Why me?" I began asking, "What can I do about this?" That small change in perspective opened doors that I didn't even know were possible. I became more proactive, more intentional, and more determined. I stopped waiting for permission to go after my goals. I stopped waiting for someone to save me or guide me. I realized that no one was coming to rescue me. It was up to me to rescue myself. There were times when this responsibility felt heavy, but it was also empowering. It pushed me to grow in ways I never thought I could. I learned to take ownership of my time, my energy, and my thoughts. I began to track my habits because I knew that my daily actions were shaping my future. I also started to let go of bitterness and resentment because holding on to blame only drained me. By taking responsibility, I freed myself from being tied to the past. The most profound part of this transformation was how it changed my self-respect. Once I took responsibility, I stopped tolerating mediocrity from myself. I held myself to higher standards, not because someone else demanded it, but because I knew I owed it to myself. Every small step I took built momentum, and with every bit of progress, I gained more confidence. I no longer needed to wait for others to validate me or for life to hand me opportunities. I created them. Taking responsibility became the foundation of everything else that followed in my transformation. Without it, I would have remained stuck in a cycle of excuses and frustration. With it, I gained freedom, freedom to choose, freedom to act, and freedom to change the course of my life. Looking back, I realized that facing the truth was one of the hardest decisions I ever made, but it was also the most important. It was the moment I stopped running from myself and started building the life I truly wanted. Breaking free from limiting beliefs was one of the most crucial steps in my transformation, because no matter how much potential a person has, it doesn't matter if their own mind convinces them they are not capable. For a long time, I lived inside the cage of my own thoughts. These weren't walls built by other people, they were walls I had unknowingly built myself. Thoughts like, I'm not smart enough, I don't come from the right background, or people like me don't succeed, became the soundtrack playing in my head every day. The worst part was that I believed them. These beliefs became invisible barriers that shaped my decisions, kept me from trying, and made me settle for less than I was capable of achieving. At first, I didn't even realize how powerful these limiting beliefs were. They disguised themselves as facts. When you repeat a negative thought long enough, it starts to feel like the truth. I would see opportunities and immediately dismiss them, not because I wasn't qualified, but because I convinced myself I wasn't good enough. I was my own biggest critic, and I held myself back more than anyone else ever did. That's the tricky thing about limiting beliefs. They make you sabotage yourself before you even begin. The turning point came when I asked myself a simple but life-changing question. What if I'm wrong about myself? What if all the reasons I believed I couldn't succeed were nothing more than stories I kept telling myself? That question shook me because for the first time I realized my beliefs weren't facts, they were choices. And if I could choose to believe I wasn't capable, I could also choose to believe I was capable. That realization was liberating. It made me aware that the battle I had to fight was not outside. It was inside my mind. Once I recognized this, I started challenging my thoughts. Every time I caught myself saying, I can't do this, I replaced it with, I'm learning how to do this, instead of, I'm not good enough. I reminded myself, I am growing and improving every day. At first, it felt fake, almost like I was lying to myself. But with time, those new beliefs began to sink in. I discovered that just as negative thoughts can become habits, so can empowering ones. Breaking free from limiting beliefs also meant surrounding myself with examples of possibility. I read stories of people who came from nothing and achieved greatness. I listened to mentors and speakers who reminded me that potential has no boundaries. The more I exposed myself to these voices, the more I realized that my excuses had no foundation. If others could rise above challenges, so could I. Their stories became proof that the limits I had set for myself were illusions. Another important part of this journey was action. It wasn't enough to just change my thinking. I had to prove to myself through action that I was capable of more than I believed. Every time I took a step outside of my comfort zone, no matter how small, I gained evidence that I was stronger than I thought. Whether it was speaking up in a room where I once would have stayed silent, pursuing an opportunity I thought was out of reach, or simply sticking to a goal I would normally quit, each action chipped away at those old beliefs. Slowly, I started to build a new identity for myself, an identity based on growth, resilience, and courage instead of fear and self-doubt. Of course, the old beliefs didn't disappear overnight. They still tried to whisper in my ear whenever I faced something difficult. But now, instead of letting them control me, I recognized them for what they were, lies that once held me back, and with that awareness, I could push past them. I learned that fear and doubt never completely vanish, but they lose their power when you stop believing them. Looking back, I realized that breaking free from limiting beliefs was like unlocking a prison door I had locked myself in. The freedom I gained was not just about chasing goals, it was about reclaiming my sense of worth. I no longer looked at myself as someone who might not make it. I began to see myself as someone who could grow, adapt, and create opportunities through persistence and faith. The greatest lesson I took from this experience is that our beliefs shape our reality. If you believe you can't, you won't even try. But if you believe you can, you'll find the strength to push through obstacles and keep moving forward. The limits we live with are usually the ones we place on ourselves. Once I broke free from mine, I discovered a life filled with possibilities I had never imagined. And that's when true transformation became possible. When I think about the single quality that held all the pieces of my transformation together, it was self-discipline. Talent gave me potential, motivation gave me energy, but discipline gave me consistency. Without discipline, I would have been a person full of dreams but empty of results. Building unshakable self, discipline didn't come naturally to me. In fact, it was one of the hardest lessons I had to learn. For years, I operated on feelings. If I felt motivated, I would take action, and if I didn't, I would procrastinate or give up. That cycle kept me stuck. Real growth began the moment I realized that discipline meant doing what needed to be done even when I didn't feel like doing it. At first, I struggled because I thought discipline was about restriction, about living a rigid life without joy. But the truth is, discipline is freedom. It gave me freedom from the chaos of inconsistency and freedom from the regret of wasted time. Discipline allowed me to create structure in my life, and that structure became the foundation for growth. When I committed to building discipline, I started small. I didn't try to change everything overnight. I picked one habit, like waking up earlier, and focused on being consistent with it. The more I followed through on small commitments, the stronger my sense of control grew. I discovered that discipline is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it becomes. There were days when I wanted to quit, when my mind tried to convince me that skipping one day wouldn't hurt. But I knew that every skip day made it harder to trust myself. Discipline isn't just about controlling your actions, it's about building self-trust. Every time I kept a promise to myself, I sent my brain a message, I can count on me. That self-trust became a powerful force. It built confidence, not from what I said I would do, but from what I actually did. Another important realization was that discipline thrives on clarity. I had to know exactly what I wanted and why it mattered. Vague goals led to vague actions, and vague actions led to no results. So I became intentional. I set clear goals, broke them into steps, and committed to showing up daily. Having clarity removed a lot of the mental resistance, because instead of wasting energy wondering what to do, I focused my energy on actually doing it. Of course, discipline doesn't mean perfection. I stumbled many times along the way. There were mornings I hit snooze, workouts I skipped, and goals I delayed. But the difference was, I no longer let failure spiral into quitting. Discipline taught me resilience. When I fell, I got back up faster. I treated setbacks not as proof that I couldn't succeed, but as part of the process of becoming stronger. This shift was life-changing because it kept me consistent long enough to see real results. Discipline also required me to make tough choices about my environment. I realized I couldn't expect to stay committed if I was constantly surrounded by distractions or negativity, so I adjusted my surroundings. I limited time with people who drained my energy. I reduced distractions that pulled me away from my goals, and I created routines that supported my growth. Discipline wasn't just about willpower. It was about designing my life in a way that made staying consistent easier than quitting. The more disciplined I became, the more control I gained over my future. Tasks that once felt impossible became natural habits. What started as effort turned into lifestyle, and with every disciplined action, I built momentum. That momentum spilled into every area of my life: health, career, relationships, and mindset. Discipline gave me the power to stay focused when others were distracted, to keep going when others gave up, and to trust the process even when results were slow to show. Looking back, I realized that discipline was not about punishment. It was about alignment. It aligned my actions with my goals and my habits with my vision. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The truth is, discipline is the bridge between desire and achievement. Without it, dreams remain dreams. With it, dreams become reality. Building unshakable self, discipline was the key that turned my intentions into accomplishments, and it became one of the greatest gifts I gave myself. Persistence through failure was the fuel that carried me forward when everything else seemed to be working against me. I used to think that successful people had something I didn't. Maybe luck, maybe natural talent, or maybe they just never faced the kind of setbacks I did. But over time, I discovered that the real difference wasn't that they avoided failure, but that they refused to let failure stop them. They kept going when others quit. They pushed forward when it was easier to turn back. That realization changed the way I viewed failure. Instead of seeing it as a dead end, I began to see it as part of the road to success. Failure is painful, there's no denying that. It stings, it bruises your confidence, and it makes you question whether you're good enough. I remember moments when I poured my heart and effort into something only to watch it fall apart. Each failure felt like a personal rejection, a message from life that maybe I wasn't cut out for more. But with time and reflection, I realized failure wasn't telling me to quit. It was teaching me lessons I could never learn in comfort. Every failure revealed weaknesses I needed to strengthen, skills I needed to sharpen, and character I needed to build. The hardest part was pushing past the emotional weight of failure. It's easy to stay motivated when things are going well, but persistence is tested in the dark moments. When no one is cheering you on, when doubts echo louder than dreams, and when the easiest option is giving up. Those were the moments when persistence mattered most. I had to remind myself that failure was not final unless I made it final. Every setback was simply feedback, guiding me toward a better version of myself. One of the biggest shifts I made was reframing failure as progress. If I failed, it meant I was trying. If I was trying, it meant I was moving. And if I was moving, eventually I would grow into the person capable of achieving my goals. This mindset freed me from the fear of failing because I began to understand that failure wasn't the opposite of success. It was a necessary step toward it. Persistence also taught me patience. In a world that celebrates instant results, it's easy to expect quick success. But true growth takes time, and persistence is the bridge between effort and reward. There were seasons when I gave everything I had and saw little to no return. That's when persistence tested me the most. It asked me, will you keep going even if it takes longer than you thought? Choosing to persist in those moments was not just about chasing goals, it was about building endurance. It was about proving to myself that my commitment was stronger than my circumstances. The more I practiced persistence, the more I realized that failure had a hidden gift, resilience. Every time I got back up after falling, I became tougher, sharper, and more determined. The failures that once crushed me became fuel. They gave me stories to learn from, experiences to draw strength from, and wisdom to guide me. I no longer feared failure because I knew I could survive it, and more importantly, I knew I could grow from it. Looking back, I can say with certainty that persistence through failure is what separated my old self from who I am today. It wasn't that I stopped failing. It was that I stopped letting failure define me. I refused to let one bad chapter ruin the story. I kept writing, kept pushing, and kept believing that every failure was shaping me for the moment I would finally succeed. And when that success came, it tasted sweeter because I knew what it cost me. Persistence through failure became my greatest ally. It gave me strength when motivation ran dry. It gave me vision when setbacks clouded my path. Most importantly, it gave me the unshakable belief that no matter how many times I fall, I will rise again. That belief is what carried me from where I was to where I am, and it will continue to carry me wherever I go next. One of the most powerful lessons I learned in transforming my life was the importance of the people I surrounded myself with. For a long time, I underestimated just how much influence my environment had on me. I believed that as long as I stayed focused on my own path, the attitudes, habits, and energy of those around me wouldn't affect me. But I was wrong. The truth is, the people closest to us shape our standards, our mindset, and even our vision for what is possible. If you want to grow, you need to surround yourself with people who inspire growth, not those who keep you stuck where you are. When I looked back at my old circle, I realized something uncomfortable. Many of the people I spent time with were not bad people, but they weren't growth-minded either. They were comfortable with mediocrity, content with complaining, and quick to discourage ambition. Whenever I shared a new goal instead of support, I often got doubt or negativity. Comments like, "That's too hard," or "People like us don't do that," slowly seeped into my thinking. Without realizing it, I started lowering my own expectations to match theirs. It was as if I was carrying invisible weights, holding me back from running toward my dreams. The turning point came when I asked myself a hard question. Am I becoming the kind of person I want to be because of the people around me, or in spite of them? That question made me realize I needed to be intentional about my circle. I couldn't afford to keep absorbing negativity or limiting beliefs from others. If I wanted to rise higher, I had to place myself in an environment where rising higher was the standard. So I began seeking out people who were driven, disciplined, and hungry for growth. At first, it wasn't easy. These weren't the people I naturally hung out with before, and being around them sometimes made me feel uncomfortable. They challenged me, not with criticism, but by their example. When I saw their work ethic, their discipline, and their resilience, it forced me to raise my own standards. They weren't making excuses, they were making progress. That kind of energy is contagious. Being around growth-minded people shifted my perspective. Instead of asking, "Can I really do this?" I started asking, "How can I do this?" One of the greatest benefits of surrounding myself with growth-minded people was accountability. When you're around people who are pushing themselves, they won't let you settle for less than your best either. They remind you of your goals when you feel like giving up. They celebrate your progress, but they also challenge you when you're slipping. That kind of accountability is priceless because it keeps you consistent even when your own motivation fades. Another thing I noticed was how growth-minded people see possibility where others see limitations. They don't focus on obstacles, they focus on solutions. They don't ask why something can't be done, they ask what needs to be done to make it happen. That way of thinking rubbed off on me. I started to approach challenges differently, not as reasons to quit, but as opportunities to grow stronger. Of course, creating this new environment required making some tough choices. I had to distance myself from relationships that no longer aligned with my vision. It wasn't easy because some of those people had been in my life for years. But I realized that loyalty to my old circle couldn't come at the cost of loyalty to my future. Sometimes growth requires letting go, not because you don't care about people, but because you care enough about yourself to protect your energy and your potential. Looking back, I can see that this shift was one of the most important steps in my transformation. When I changed my environment, I changed my mindset. When I changed my mindset, I changed my habits. And when I changed my habits, I changed my life. It all started with surrounding myself with people who challenged me to grow, inspired me to dream bigger, and reminded me that settling was never an option. Now I understand that success is not just about what you know or how hard you work, it's also about who you walk with. If you walk with dreamers, doers, and believers, you'll find yourself becoming one too. But if you walk with those who only see limits, eventually you'll adopt their limits as your own. That's why I chose to surround myself with growth-minded people, and it became one of the most life-changing decisions I ever made. Living with purpose and creating lasting change was the ultimate shift that tied everything in my journey together. I had spent years chasing temporary highs, quick wins, short-lived achievements, and moments of external validation. But none of it filled the emptiness inside me. I realized that transformation wasn't just about improving my habits, mindset, or even achieving success. Real transformation was about aligning my life with a deeper purpose. Without purpose, no amount of success would satisfy me. Without purpose, every victory felt incomplete. The turning point came when I asked myself, why am I really doing all of this? What's the bigger reason behind my goals? That question changed everything. Purpose gave me clarity. It was no longer just about making money, gaining recognition, or proving something to others. Those things may have motivated me in the past, but they weren't enough to keep me going when life got hard. Purpose, however, was fuel that never ran out. It gave meaning to my struggles and made even the toughest days worth it. When I started aligning my goals with my purpose, I noticed a profound change. I stopped chasing and started building. I wasn't running after things anymore. I was creating something that mattered. Finding my purpose didn't happen overnight. At first, I thought purpose had to be some grand mission, something the whole world would notice. But I learned that purpose is often simpler and more personal than that. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself, whether that's helping others, inspiring change, creating value, or leaving behind something that outlives you. My purpose began with the desire to grow into the best version of myself so I could help others do the same. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being useful. That mindset gave my life a new sense of direction. Living with purpose also made me more intentional about how I spent my time and energy. I stopped saying yes to things that didn't align with my values, and I stopped wasting energy on things that didn't serve my future. I began asking myself with every choice, does this bring me closer to my purpose or further away from it? That simple question helped me cut out distractions, toxic habits, and meaningless pursuits. Instead, I invested my time in what truly mattered, building relationships, creating impact, and pursuing meaningful goals. Another key part of living with purpose is that it creates resilience. Challenges and failures didn't disappear from my life, but they no longer had the power to derail me. When you're driven by purpose, setbacks become stepping stones. You don't quit because the journey gets hard. You keep going because the destination matters too much. Purpose gave me a reason to persist when motivation ran dry. It reminded me that my struggle was not in vain. It was shaping me to fulfill the mission I was meant to carry. But purpose alone isn't enough. Purpose must be tied to action in order to create lasting change. It's easy to say you have a purpose, but living it daily is where true transformation happens. I realized I had to embody my purpose in my choices, my habits, and the way I showed up for others. Purpose had to move from being an idea in my mind to being a practice in my life. That's where lasting change comes in. Lasting change isn't built on hype, quick fixes, or temporary motivation. It's built on living aligned with your values day after day. The more I lived with purpose, the more fulfillment I experienced. It was no longer about how much I had, but about how much I gave.
It was no longer about being seen, but about making a difference. This shift gave me peace, confidence, and a deep sense of satisfaction that success alone could never provide.
Purpose gave me a legacy to build, something that would live on long after me. Looking back, I can see that every step of my transformation, taking responsibility, breaking free from limiting beliefs, building discipline, persisting through failure, and surrounding myself with growth-minded people, was preparing me for this final step, to live with purpose. Purpose is what gives all the other steps meaning. It turns progress into impact, goals into fulfillment, and life into a journey worth living. Creating lasting change isn't about never struggling again. It's about ensuring that everything you do leaves behind a trail of value, inspiration, and growth for others to follow. That, to me, is the essence of transformation. Not just changing your own life, but using that change to light the path for someone else.